The biting wind was a constant thief, stealing warmth from exposed skin and breath from the lungs. Petty Officer Anya Sharma felt it scour the granite face of the desolate peak, a monolithic tooth of rock clawing at the bruised Alaskan sky. Around her, the other candidates in the final phase of the Special Warfare Selection Course were monuments of grim endurance, their faces etched with the strain of altitude and exertion. They were all larger than her, broader in the shoulder, their movements carrying a weight of brute force she had long ago learned to compensate for with economy and leverage. They moved in a cloud of quiet condescension, a low-pressure system of doubt that followed her from the barracks to the brutal vertical classroom of the Chugach Mountains. She was an anomaly, a statistical improbability in their world of hardened masculinity, and they treated her as such. The looks she received were not of overt hostility, but of a kind of weary pity, as if her presence was a bureaucratic mandate they were all forced to endure. She ignored them. The mountain did not care about gender, only about gravity, friction, and the will to overcome. Master Chief Thorne, the lead instructor, watched them all through the high-powered lens of his spotting scope from a command post 1,000 yards away. His face was a mask of chiseled granite itself, his eyes missing nothing. He had seen hundreds of candidates wash out on this very traverse, a notorious section of the course known as the Needle's Eye. He saw Sharma moving with a fluid precision that seemed out of place. He interpreted it as timidity. Where the men used explosive power to conquer an obstacle, she used methodical, patient movements. He saw her partner, Specialist Graves, a thick-necked former ranger with a chip on his shoulder, seemingly pulling her through the tougher sections. Thorne made a note on his slate. Predictable. She was being carried. The team was only as strong as its weakest link, and he had already identified it. His job was to cull the herd, to find the breaking point of every single person on that mountain, and he was certain he had found hers. The cold was a physical presence, sinking into their bones. Sharma focused on her breathing, a rhythmic cadence of intake and exhalation that fogged the air before her face. Each breath was a small victory against the oxygen-thin air. Her gloved hands, though numb, moved with practiced certainty over the rock and the safety lines. She checked her carabiner, then Graves. He grunted, shrugging her hand away. "I got it," he muttered, his voice tight with irritation. He felt the weight of the other candidate's judgment, the unspoken accusation that he was saddled with the diversity hire. Every careful step she took, he felt, was a reflection on his own inability to move faster, to keep pace with the main group. He wanted to be free of her, to prove he belonged with the alpha dogs of the pack. The wind howled, a mournful cry that seemed to rise from the deep, glacial valleys below. Sharma paused, her cheek pressed against the frozen rock, feeling the vibration of the mountain itself. Something was wrong. Not with the weather, not with the gear. It was a subtle shift in the tension of the rope, in the posture of the man clipped in ahead of her. It was the feeling she'd had once before, in a marketplace in Kandahar moments before the world erupted in fire and dust. A premonition of violence. She looked up at Graves. His face was turned away, but she could see the rigid line of his jaw. He was fumbling with his line near the anchor point. Fumbling with a purpose. Her mind, a machine honed by years of relentless training, began processing possibilities, calculating angles and reactions. But in this vertical world, tethered to another's mercy, the calculations were grim. The moment was deceptively quiet, lost in the shriek of the wind. Graves' hand moved with a sudden, jerky finality. It wasn't a dramatic slash with a knife, but a colder, more technical betrayal. A quick, deliberate manipulation of the locking gate on his carabiner, a flick of the rope from its anchor. To any distant observer, it would have looked like a procedural error, a piece of gear failing under strain. But Sharma saw the intent in the set of his shoulders. She felt the sudden, sickening slack in the line, the loss of connection that was her life. Her world tilted. For a fraction of a second, there was only the wind and the wide, empty sky. Then gravity asserted its absolute authority. She fell. Her body scraped against the rock face, a brutal, abrasive farewell. The fall wasn't a cinematic plummet into a bottomless chasm. It was a chaotic, tumbling descent of 30, maybe 40 feet, ending with a bone-jarring impact on a narrow, snow-dusted ledge. The pain was a white-hot nova that exploded in her left wrist and bloomed across her ribs. She lay there, stunned, the air driven from her lungs in a ragged gasp. Above, she heard a faint, distorted shout. Rope snapped. Candidate lost. Sharma's gone. Graves' voice was a masterful performance of panic and shock. The lie traveled over the radio waves, solidifying into official record. At the observation post, Master Chief Thorne swore under his breath. He focused his scope on the traverse, seeing the chaos as the other candidates secured themselves, the feigned distress on Graves' face. He scanned the face below, searching. He saw nothing. A fall like that, onto the jagged terrain, there was no chance. It was a recovery operation now, not a rescue. He felt a stab of something unwelcome. Not guilt, not yet. Annoyance. The paperwork would be a nightmare. An investigation would be launched. It was a complication in the clean, brutal arithmetic of selection. He keyed his mic, his voice flat and professional. All teams, halt in place. Secure your positions. Stand by for instruction. Down on the ledge, the world slowly swam back into focus for Anya Sharma. Pain was the first anchor, a sharp, insistent signal from her body. The second was the cold, already seeping through her gear, a patient predator. She forced herself to move, a slow, agonizing process. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She fought it down. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. It was the enemy that killed you before the cold or the fall ever could. Her training, layered deep in her psyche, took over. It was a calm, cold voice in the midst of the storm of agony. Asterisk assess. Breathe. Assess. Asterisk. She flexed her fingers on her right hand. Good. She tried to move her left. A lance of fire shot up her arm. Broken wrist. Definitely broken. She probed her ribs. The pain was deep, visceral, bruised, maybe cracked. Breathing was going to be an ordeal. She looked around. The ledge was no more than 3 feet wide, a precarious scar on the mountain's face. Above her, the rock wall was a sheer, unforgiving curtain of granite and ice. Below, a drop of 2,000 feet into a sea of glacial ice. She was in a cage with no bars, trapped between the impossible and the inevitable. The wind picked up, driving icy pellets against her face. A storm was coming in, fast. The gray sky was turning a dark, bruised purple. They wouldn't come for her. Not in this weather. Not for a body. They had left her for dead. A flicker of rage, hot and pure, cut through the pain. It was a warmth she welcomed. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had tried to murder her. He had pushed her off the mountain. And they had all just watched. The rage was a fire, but a controlled one. She banked it, channeled it, transformed it from a blinding emotion into a source of fuel. It was the heat that would keep the encroaching cold at bay. The calm, logical part of her mind, the part forged in simulations and hardened in actual fire, was now fully in command. Asterisk situation, compromised. Location, untenable. Objective, survival. Asterisk survival was not a passive act. It was not waiting for a rescue that would never come. Survival was action. It was defiance. She systematically took inventory of her assets. The contents of her pockets were meager. A multi-tool with a small, serrated blade. A ferro rod. A compact emergency blanket. A single protein bar. In a small pouch on her belt, a basic first aid kit. It was laughably inadequate for her circumstances. She was a castaway on a vertical island in a sea of frozen air. She looked at her broken wrist. The jagged end of the ulna was a faint ridge beneath the skin. Immobilizing it was the first priority. Using her teeth and her good hand, she tore strips from the hem of her base layer. She found 2 flat, narrow shards of rock and, with agonizing care, fashioned a crude but effective splint, binding it tightly. The pain was a blinding sheet of white, and for a moment the world went gray at the edges. She focused on her breathing, riding the wave until it crested and began to recede, leaving a throbbing, manageable ache in its wake. Next, the environment. The storm was no longer approaching, it was arriving. The wind was a physical blow, threatening to peel her from her narrow perch. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a hard, stinging curtain that reduced visibility to near zero. The temperature was plummeting. The emergency blanket would offer some protection, but it wouldn't be enough to prevent hypothermia if she remained stationary. She had to move. But where? Down was death. Staying put was death. That left only one direction. Up. She tilted her head back, the snow stinging her eyes, and looked at the wall above her. It was a climber's nightmare. A sheer face, slick with verglas in the cracks, offering few obvious handholds. It was a climb that would have been considered extremely difficult for a two-handed expert with a full rack of gear and ropes. For a woman with a broken wrist, no equipment, and the beginnings of hypothermia, it was not just impossible. It was absurd, a suicidal fantasy. And yet, the alternative was the quiet, certain death of freezing on this ledge. The logic was inescapable, as brutal and clear as the mountain itself. Certain death versus a microscopic chance of life. Her training hadn't just taught her how to fight or how to endure. It had taught her how to think. It had stripped away the paralysis of fear and replaced it with a relentless calculus of options. And in this equation, there was only one variable that led to a non-zero outcome. She had to climb. She had to climb out of her own grave. She ate half of the protein bar, chewing slowly, forcing the chalky substance down her throat. It was fuel. She needed every calorie. Then, she took a deep breath, the icy air searing her lungs, and placed her good hand on the rock. It was time to go to work. The first few feet were a study in agony and precision. Every movement was a negotiation with pain and gravity. Her right hand, the good one, became her primary tool for exploration and purchase. Her fingers, raw and numb, searched for the smallest cracks, the slightest protrusions in the rock. Her legs, powerful and conditioned, provided the upward thrust. Her broken left arm was a liability, a dead weight she had to protect. She kept it tucked against her chest, the splint a constant, grinding reminder of her vulnerability. The splinted arm was not useless, however. She learned to use the elbow and the rigid forearm as a brace, a point of friction to stabilize herself while her right hand sought a new hold. It was an ugly, inefficient way to climb, a desperate improvisation born of necessity. The mountain resisted her. The rock was colder than anything she had ever touched, a profound, absolute cold that seemed to draw the life out of her fingertips. The wind tore at her, a malevolent force trying to pry her loose and cast her into the abyss. Snow collected on the tiny ledges she aimed for, forcing her to clear them with a puff of breath or a sweep of her hand before she could trust them with her weight. Her world shrank to the few square feet of rock directly in front of her. The vast, terrifying drop below ceased to exist. The summit, impossibly far above, was an abstract concept. All that mattered was the next hold. And the one after that. Time lost its meaning. There was only the rhythm of her own labored breathing, the scrape of her boots on stone, the dull, relentless throb in her arm. Memories surfaced, unbidden, not from the SEAL course, but from an earlier time, a different kind of training. She saw the face of an old Sherpa, his features a roadmap of sun and wind, on a different mountain range halfway across the world. He had taught her not to conquer a mountain, but to listen to it. "The rock will tell you the way," he had said, his voice quiet. "You must be patient enough to hear it." He had taught her to read the subtle language of the stone, the grain, the stress fractures, the water stains that hinted at hidden weaknesses. He had taught her to climb without ropes, not as a stunt, but as a form of meditation, a way to become part of the mountain itself. That training, part of a program so secret it was officially denied, was what she drew on now. She was not just a SEAL candidate. She was something else, something more. She found a rhythm. Reach, test, hold. Push, shift, lock. Breathe. The mantra repeated in her mind, a shield against the pain and the fear. At one point, her boot slipped on a patch of ice. Her body swung out from the rock, her entire weight held by the fingertips of her right hand. The tendons in her forearms screamed in protest. For a terrifying moment, she dangled over the void. The instinct to panic, to scramble wildly, rose in her throat. She crushed it. She hung there, motionless, taking a single, slow breath. Then, with deliberate control, she swung her body back in, her boots finding purchase once more. She pressed her face to the rock, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had not fallen. The mountain had tested her, and she had held. She allowed herself a few seconds to recover, then continued upward, one hold at a time. The climb was transforming her. The cold, the pain, the sheer, relentless effort was stripping away everything but the core of her being. The petty officer, the candidate, the woman, all of it was burning away, leaving only the will to live. From the observation post, the world had been reduced to a swirling vortex of white. The storm had descended with full fury, blanketing the mountain and making any further visual assessment impossible. Master Chief Thorne had ordered the teams to dig in, to ride out the worst of it. The loss of Sharma was now a settled fact in his mind, a tragic but foreseeable outcome. He was already composing the incident report in his head, using the precise, sterile language of military bureaucracy. Candidates succumbed to treacherous conditions during a high-altitude traverse. Rope and equipment failure suspected. It was clean. It absolved everyone of responsibility. Specialist Graves sat apart from the others, his face pale, a thermos of coffee shaking in his hands. He played the part of the grieving partner well, but Thorne saw the fear in his eyes. The fear of a man who knows he has gotten away with something terrible. The storm raged for hours. As the afternoon light began to fade, the snowfall lessened, the wind's roar softened to a mournful sigh. The clouds began to break apart, revealing stunning, transient glimpses of the mountain, bathed in the ethereal glow of the setting sun. A junior instructor, a young lieutenant named Harris, manned the spotting scope, his eyes raw from staring into the gale. He was scanning the traverse route, hoping to get a clearer view of the accident site before they lost the light completely. He adjusted the focus, sweeping down the rock face from where Sharma had fallen. He expected to see nothing but rock and ice. Then he stopped. He blinked, rubbing his eyes. He looked again. There was something there. A dark shape, a smudge against the gray granite, far below the traverse, but significantly above the ledge where she must have landed. He squinted, cranking the magnification to its maximum. It was moving. "Master Chief," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You need to see this." Thorne moved to the scope, a flicker of irritation on his face. "What is it, Lieutenant?" "A caribou." "No, sir," Harris said, his voice tight with disbelief. I think it's her." Thorne peered into the eyepiece. He scanned the area Harris indicated. At first, he saw nothing. Then he caught it. A flicker of movement. Slow, painfully slow, but deliberate, unmistakable. A human figure, climbing. He felt a jolt, a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. It was impossible. No one could survive that fall. No one could climb that face. Not in these conditions, not without gear. He watched, transfixed, as the tiny figure painstakingly hoisted itself up another few feet. It was a person. It was Sharma. A cold dread, mingled with a feeling he couldn't name, awe, perhaps, crept over him. He had been a SEAL for 25 years. He had seen men perform acts of incredible strength and endurance. He had never seen anything like this. This wasn't training. This wasn't about passing a course. This was something primal, something terrifyingly magnificent. "Get on the comms," Thorne said, his voice low and urgent, never taking his eye from the scope. "Get me Commander Sterling at base. Now." He called Graves over. "Specialist, take a look." Graves hesitated, then shuffled to the scope. He put his eye to the lens. His body went rigid. A strangled sound escaped his throat. He saw her, a ghost climbing out of hell, coming for him. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly, greenish pallor. He stumbled back, his carefully constructed composure shattering like thin ice. The other candidates, drawn by the tension, gathered around. Whispers turned to stunned silence as the word spread. They were all watching now. They were no longer instructors and candidates. They were witnesses to a resurrection. The world had devolved into a singular, brutal focus. The rock face was a vertical desert, and Anya Sharma was its sole, tormented inhabitant. Every inch of her body screamed in protest. The muscles in her back and legs burned with a fire that bordered on agony. The throbbing in her splinted wrist was a constant, percussive beat against her consciousness. Her good hand was a claw, the skin abraded and bleeding, the joint swollen. Yet she climbed. She moved with a grim, metronomic persistence that defied the limits of her own body. The memories of her secret training became more vivid, a lifeline in the sea of pain. She remembered her instructor, the old Sherpa they called the Snow Leopard. He had taught her to find rests where none existed, to use the nuances of balance and counterpressure to conserve energy. He had forced her to climb blindfolded, to learn the texture of the rock by touch alone, to trust her instincts when her eyes failed her. The mountain grants passage to those who show respect, he had told her. Hubris is what kills. It was a lesson she had taken to heart. This was not a conquest. This was a plea for passage. She was not fighting the mountain. She was asking it to let her live. She was paying for every foot of progress with a currency of pain and sheer will. A new sound reached her, carried on the fickle wind. A mechanical whirring. Far below, a drone. She knew what it was. They were watching her. Thorn was watching her. The knowledge sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through her system. It was not a comforting thought. It was a challenge. They had left her for dead. Now they would see what a dead woman could do. The drone hovered, its camera lens an unblinking, judgmental eye. It documented her struggle, her slow, torturous ascent. It saw the makeshift splint, the raw state of her hands, the exhaustion etched into every line of her body. It saw the impossible being made real. Back at the command post, the mood was tense, silent, and reverent. The drone feed was being projected onto a screen. No one spoke. They watched the display, mesmerized by the raw drama unfolding before them. Thorn was on the sat phone with Commander Sterling, his voice stripped of its usual brusque authority. "Sir, you're not going to believe this. Sharma is alive. She's climbing the north face, unassisted." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Master Chief, repeat that. Did you say unassisted?" "Affirmative, sir. No ropes, no gear. She's injured. We're watching her on the drone feed now. I've never seen anything like it." "Her file," Sterling said, his voice sharp. "I'm pulling it now." Another silence, longer this time. Thorn could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. When Sterling spoke again, his tone had changed completely. It was grave, serious. "Master Chief, listen to me very carefully. Petty Officer Sharma was attached to Asymmetrical Warfare Group 7 before this. Her jacket is mostly black ink. She's a graduate of Project Chimera." Thorn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Project Chimera. He'd only heard rumors. A clandestine, experimental program designed to create solo operators capable of deep infiltration in the world's most hostile environments. Ghosts. They were legends, myths whispered about in classified briefing rooms. They weren't supposed to be real, and he had been treating one of them like a raw recruit. He looked over at Graves, who was now openly trembling. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Graves hadn't just cut a fellow candidate loose. He had attempted to murder one of the most highly trained operators in the entire U.S. military. Thorn looked back at the screen, at the small, indomitable figure on the rock face. He wasn't looking at a candidate anymore. He was looking at a living legend. The crux was 100 feet below the summit ridge. It was an overhang, a lip of granite that jutted out like a sneer, slick with ice. For a fully equipped climber, it would be a challenging but manageable problem requiring specialized moves and equipment. For Anya, it was a wall, a definitive, final barrier. Her upward progress halted. She clung to the face just below the overhang, her body screaming for rest. Her strength was gone. Her reserves were depleted. The fire of her rage had burned down to embers, leaving only the cold, hard ash of exhaustion. Doubt, the enemy she had kept at bay for hours, began to creep into the edges of her mind. This was it. This was where she would fail. She had climbed out of her grave only to die in sight of the sky. She pressed her forehead against the rock, the cold a brutal shock. She closed her eyes, listened to the mountain. The old Sherpa's voice was a whisper in her memory. She forced herself to breathe, to calm the frantic hammering of her heart. She opened her eyes and looked, truly looked, at the problem. Not as a single, insurmountable obstacle, but as a series of smaller components. There was a vertical fissure, a crack running up the face of the overhang, too thin for a handhold. To her right, a small, icy knob of rock, barely the size of a fist. It was a puzzle, a lethal one, and the clock was ticking. The last of the daylight was fading, the sky turning a deep, starless indigo. The temperature was dropping fast. If she didn't get over this crux, if she didn't get to the top before full nightfall, she would freeze to death right here, a human gargoyle clinging to the side of the mountain. She knew what she had to do. It was a move she had practiced only once, on a custom-built climbing wall in a windowless facility in Virginia. A move that was considered a theoretical possibility, a last-ditch resort. The instructor had called it a dynamic release. A more honest name would have been controlled fall. She would have to use her serrated multi-tool. Gripping it in her good hand, she reached up and jammed the tip of the blade into the thin fissure. It held. Barely. Then came the terrifying part. She had to let go with her feet. She had to swing her entire body out into the void, using the pendulum motion to generate enough momentum to swing her legs up and over the lip of the overhang. It was a move that required perfect timing, immense core strength, and an absolute faith in a half-inch of steel jammed into a crack. On the drone feed, the watchers in the command post held their collective breath. They saw her wedge the tool into the rock. They saw her pause, gathering herself. What is she doing? Lieutenant Harris breathed. Thorne knew. He had read about this technique in a classified after-action report from the Hindu Kush. An operator, cornered and out of options, had used it to scale an unclimbable fortress wall. The report had not named the operator. Now he knew who it was. She's going for it, Thorne said, his voice rough with emotion. Sharma took one last, deep breath, and then she let go. For a heart-stopping moment, she was nothing but a pendulum of flesh and bone, swinging out over a 2,000-foot drop. The wind roared in her ears, the abyss beckoned. Her entire existence was tethered to the small piece of steel wedged in the rock, her grip on the multi-tool the only thing keeping her connected to the world of the living. The strain on her right arm was immense, a tearing, searing fire that threatened to rip the socket from her shoulder. But she held. Her body reached the apex of its outward swing. Now, with a guttural cry that was torn from the very depths of her soul, she used the momentum, contracting her core muscles in one explosive effort. She swung her legs up, high over her head, her boots scrabbling for purchase on the lip of the overhang. Her toes found a hold. The momentum carried her, her body flopping ungracefully onto the upper surface of the crux. She lay there, half on, half off the overhang, gasping, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. She had done it. The most difficult part was over, but it had cost her everything. She had no strength left. The multi-tool was still wedged in the rock below her, lost. Her good hand was a mangled mess. The summit was just 100 feet away, but it felt like 1,000 miles. She lay there, the freezing rock leaching the last of her warmth, and felt a profound, overwhelming despair. She had come so far, only to die here, in sight of her goal. The screen in the command post erupted in a single, involuntary gasp of relief, followed by a stunned, heavy silence. They had just witnessed a miracle. They had seen something that would be told in hushed, reverent tones in the barracks and briefing rooms for years to come. Thorne felt a wave of profound shame. He had misjudged her so completely, so fundamentally. He had looked at her and seen a woman, a diversity quota, a weak link. He had failed to see the warrior underneath. He had allowed his prejudice to blind him to the reality of who and what she was. He looked at Graves, whose face was a mask of utter ruin. The specialist knew his career was over. He knew that when this story was told, he would be its villain, the coward who had tried to extinguish this incredible light. He had not just broken the code of the Brotherhood. He had committed a sacrilege. Thorne keyed his radio, his voice thick. "Commander Sterling, she's over the crux. She's on the upper slope. What's her condition?" Sterling's voice was tense. "Exhausted, sir. She's not moving. I don't think she has anything left." Thorne watched the unmoving figure on the screen. He felt a desperate, paternal urge to do something, to help her, to will her to her feet. He had put her through this crucible, he and the institutional arrogance he represented. He had a duty to see it through. "Get the med team ready," Thorne barked at the others. "I want a full evacuation kit at the summit ridge as soon as we can get there. Move." He turned his attention back to the screen, to the lone figure lying on the frozen rock. "Get up, Sharma," he thought, his silent plea directed across the 1,000 yards of frozen air. Asterisk, "Don't you dare die now. Get up." Asterisk, as if she had heard him, the figure on the screen stirred. It was a slow, agonizingly painful movement. But she was moving. She was getting to her feet. She was going to finish the climb. The final 100 feet were not a climb. They were a crawl. Anya Sharma moved on hands and knees, dragging her broken body up the last, gentler slope toward the summit ridge. The spectacular athleticism was gone, replaced by a slow, shambling, primeval crawl. It was the movement of a creature that refused to die. Each motion sent waves of nausea and pain through her. Her vision tunneled, the world fading to a gray blur at the edges. The only thing that kept her moving was the image of the ridgeline against the darkening sky. It was salvation. It was the end. The snow was falling more heavily now, a soft, silent shroud. It covered her, dusting her hair and shoulders, as if the mountain itself were trying to reclaim her, to pull her into its frozen embrace. She fought against it, her movements becoming slower, more spasmodic. Her mind was detaching, floating away from the ruined vessel of her body. She could feel the insidious warmth of advanced hypothermia beginning to set in, a dangerous, tempting siren song urging her to lie down, to rest, to sleep. She bit her own lip, the sharp tang of blood a grounding shock that brought her back to the present. Not yet. Not here. She could see them now. Figures on the ridgeline, dark silhouettes against the last vestiges of twilight. They were waiting for her. Her team. The men who had watched her fall. The instructor who had dismissed her. A part of her wanted to feel anger, to feel triumphant. But there was nothing left. She was an empty vessel, scoured clean by pain and effort. She reached the edge. Her bloody, mangled hand reached up over the lip of the ridge and clawed at the frozen ground. And then she could go no further. She collapsed, her body finally surrendering, her face pressed into the snow, half on the summit, half still belonging to the abyss. The team, led by Master Chief Thorn, approached her. They moved with a quiet reverence, as if approaching the site of a sacred event. The usual backslapping and loud congratulations that marked the end of a brutal exercise were absent. The air was thick with a heavy, unspoken respect. Graves was not with them. He remained at the back, a pariah, isolated by his own actions. Thorn knelt beside Sharma's still form. He looked at the makeshift splint, the blood, the sheer, utter devastation of her physical state. And he saw the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her back. She was breathing. She was alive. Without a word, he shrugged off his own heavy, fleece-lined parka, the one that marked him as the lead instructor, the master of this domain. He gently, carefully, draped it over her body, tucking it around her. It was more than an act of providing warmth. It was a gesture of surrender, an admission of his own failure of judgment. It was a profound, silent apology. He had pushed her off the mountain with his doubt and his prejudice. And he had just watched a legend climb back up. A medic rushed forward with a thermal blanket and a medical kit, but Thorn waved him off for a moment. He just knelt there, in the falling snow, beside this impossible woman, bearing witness. The other candidates stood in a silent circle, their faces a mixture of awe, shame, and a dawning, life-altering respect. They understood now. They had not been in the presence of a struggling candidate. They had been in the presence of greatness. The infirmary at the forward operating base was sterile and quiet, a world away from the raw, elemental fury of the mountain. Anya Sharma lay on a cot, and four-line dripping fluid into her good arm. Her broken wrist had been properly set and cast. Her ribs were taped. The litany of her injuries was extensive. Compound fracture of the ulna, 2 cracked ribs, severe soft tissue damage to her right hand, second-degree frostbite on her fingers and toes, and advanced hypothermia. The doctor, a Navy captain with tired eyes, had looked at her chart and then at her, and had simply shaken his head in disbelief. By all medical logic, he had said softly, "You should not be alive." Sharma had offered no reply. She lay still, her eyes closed, though she was not asleep. She was rebuilding, reclaiming the quiet, internal space that the mountain had scoured clean. The events on the Needles I were already solidifying into a powerful myth that was spreading through the base like wildfire. The official story was a carefully constructed narrative of equipment failure and a heroic act of self-rescue. But everyone knew the truth. They knew about Graves being confined to quarters, pending an official investigation that was a mere formality before his court-martial. They knew about the drone footage that was now classified at the highest level. And they knew that the woman lying in the infirmary was not just another SEAL. She was something else entirely. Master Chief Thorn stood outside her door for a long time before entering. He held a thin manila folder in his hand. When he finally walked in, he did so quietly, standing by her bedside. She opened her eyes. They were clear, calm, and held no trace of accusation. They simply watched him. He did not offer the words of apology he had rehearsed. They felt cheap, inadequate. Words could not bridge the chasm of his misjudgment. Instead, he placed the folder on the small table next to her cot. "Your new assignment came through," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its former authority. It was the voice of one professional speaking to another. "It's from Admiral Kane's office." The name hung in the air. Admiral Kane, commander of all naval special warfare. An assignment from his office was not just a posting. It was an anointment. It was a summons to the highest, most dangerous, and most secret echelons of their world. It was a place reserved for the very best, for the ghosts, for the legends. He had pulled every string he had, made a call to Commander Sterling, and leveraged 25 years of service to ensure this happened, to make sure she was taken out of the brutal anonymity of the selection course and placed where she truly belonged. It was the only form of atonement he could offer. Sharma looked at the folder, then back at him. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was an acceptance, an acknowledgement. Forgiveness was irrelevant. What mattered was the mission. What mattered was moving forward. Thorne returned the nod. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone. His own journey was just beginning. He had to re-examine everything he thought he knew about strength, about courage, about the nature of the warriors he was supposed to be forging. Sharma had been his instructor today, and the lesson had been profound. Anya slowly reached out with her good hand and drew the folder toward her. She opened it. Inside were satellite images of a new mountain range, a new set of impossible peaks in a part of the world that was not on any public map. There were technical readouts, intelligence reports, and a single, concise mission objective. It was a summons back to the high, lonely places, back to the work she was made for. She closed the folder. Through the window, she could see the distant, snow-covered peaks of the Chugash Range, their summits glowing in the clear, cold light. They had tried to bury her there, but they had forgotten. She was the seed, and this was just the beginning.